I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing out my coffee mug, when my daughter-in-law's name appeared on my phone. Not my son's. Hers. That should have told me everything right there. "Hey, Gerald." She always said my name like it was a formality, like she was signing a form at the DMV. "So, we wanted to let you know, we're doing Thanksgiving at my parents' place this year. Just close family, you know how it is. We'll catch up with you soon, okay?" She hung up before I could say anything. I stood there holding the phone, looking out of the backyard. The oak tree Margaret and I planted the year we moved in, 31 years ago, had finally lost all its leaves. The yard looked bare. The house felt the same way. Close family. She said close family. I'm his father. Let me back up, because none of this started at Thanksgiving. It started about 3 years earlier, when my son, I'll call him my son because that's what he is, even now, came to me with a problem. He and his wife had bought a house they couldn't quite afford. The mortgage payment stretched them thin, and then his wife wanted to renovate the kitchen, and then there was a second car, and then their oldest needed braces, and then, well, you know how it goes. Life is a way of expanding to fill whatever space money leaves behind. The first time he asked, it was $4,000. "Just to get through a rough patch, Dad. I'll pay you back when my bonus comes in." His bonus never came in, or if it did, I never saw any of it. I gave him the $4,000 because he was my son, and because his mother had passed 2 years before, and because I was still learning how to be a father without a partner standing beside me, and because, if I'm being honest, giving him the money made me feel useful, needed, like I still had a job. That is a terrible reason to write a check, I know that now. Over the next 2.5 years, I lent him money 9 separate times. I kept records. That part of my old accounting habits never left me. 32 years in commercial real estate does that to a man. Every loan had a date, an amount, what he said it was for. The total came to $63,000. Not 1 cent had been repaid. But I want to tell you about Thanksgiving, because that's when something shifted in me. Something I didn't know was possible. When my daughter-in-law called with her just close family speech, my first instinct was to call my son directly, to ask him if he knew, to give him a chance to fix it. I picked up the phone. I set it back down. Something my old friend used to say stopped me. "Gerald," he'd say, "when someone shows you exactly who they are, stop looking for a different answer." His name was Clement Bauer. We'd been friends since 1987, met at a commercial property conference in Denver of all places, 2 young men both pretending we knew more than we did. He'd built a logistics company from nothing, sold it in 2019 for money I won't say out loud because it still sounds fictional to me. He was the smartest person I'd ever met, and he dressed like he bought his clothes at a gas station, and I loved him for both those things. We'd stayed close through everything. His divorce in the 90s, Margaret's illness, his remarriage to a woman named June, who turned out to be extraordinary, my retirement. We talked on the phone every Sunday and saw each other 3 or 4 times a year. I hadn't told him about the money. I'm not sure why. Pride, maybe. Or shame. Or the particular kind of loneliness that makes a man keep his wounds to himself because he doesn't want anyone to see how he got them. I called him that afternoon. I told him everything. The loans. The spreadsheet I kept on my laptop. The way my son always seemed slightly put out when he called to ask, like he was doing me a favor by letting me help him. The way my daughter-in-law never once thanked me. The way my grandchildren were sometimes dangled in front of me. "The kids really miss you, Dad. It's too bad we've been so stretched thin lately," right before a new request came in. Clem listened without interrupting. That was always one of his gifts. When I finished, he said, "Are you doing anything for Thanksgiving?" I laughed. It came out hollow. "Come to Sedona," he said. "June's been after me to use the house more. Bring whatever you want. Stay as long as you want. We'll eat too much and watch football and not talk about money unless you want to." I said yes. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened in Sedona because I don't want it to sound like a movie. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet in a way I'd forgotten life could be. Clem's place sits on about 4 acres outside the city, up on a ridge with a view of the red rocks that turns colours all day, depending on where the sun is. We drove in at dusk on Wednesday, and I stepped out of the car and just stood there for a minute like an idiot. He stood next to me without saying anything. "You doing okay?" he finally asked. "I don't know," I said, and that was the most honest I'd been with anyone in 2 years. June cooked a Thanksgiving meal that would have embarrassed most restaurants. She's from Louisiana, and she doesn't apologize for butter, which I respect enormously. Their adult son flew in from Seattle, a young man named, and I'm not making this up, Beauregard, who went by Beau, and who was funny and kind, and spent most of the weekend asking me questions about commercial real estate with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. I thought about my own son the whole time, not with bitterness at first, more with a kind of ache. On Friday morning, I went for a walk by myself along the trail behind the property. Clem had a rescue dog, a big brindle mutt named Pickle, who decided I was his personal project and followed me the whole way. I stopped at a flat rock overlooking the valley and sat down. Pickle put his head in my lap. I hadn't cried since Margaret's funeral. I cried that morning, not loudly, just the kind that happens when nobody's watching. I made a mistake on Saturday, and I say that knowing full well it wasn't entirely a mistake. Clem wanted to take a photo. Said June had been getting on him about documenting things, having something to put in frames instead of just memories going stale. So we walked out to the edge of his property where the view was clearest, and June took the picture, Clem with his arm around my shoulder, both of us grinning like we hadn't aged a day since Denver in '87. The red rocks blazing behind us, his house visible in the background, the wide wooden glass structure that looked like it had grown out of the hillside. I posted it to Facebook. My caption was simple: grateful for good friends and better views. Happy Thanksgiving. I want to be precise about what happened next, because people sometimes exaggerate this part of the story when they tell it. So let me be exact. Within 4 hours, I had 41 notifications. My son called twice. My daughter-in-law texted 7 times. The text started warm, "Looks so fun," and then got a little warmer. "Wow, whose house is that?" And then got right to the point, "Dad, we should all get together soon. I know the kids would love to see you." The kids who she had 3 days earlier explained were part of the close family that didn't include me. I looked at those texts for a long time. Clem was inside watching football. Pickle was at my feet. The sun was getting low over the rocks. I didn't respond. When I got home on Sunday evening, I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I pulled up the spreadsheet. $63,400. Every loan dated, every excuse noted in the adjacent column. I stared at it for a while. Then I called my attorney. His name is Franklin. I've used him for estate work since the mid-90s, and he's the kind of man who does not waste time on sentiment when there's work to be done, which I've always appreciated. I want to change my will, I told him, and I want to do it before Christmas. We met that Tuesday. Here's what I decided, and I want to explain my reasoning because it matters to me that you understand it. I did not cut my son out entirely. I thought about it. I sat with that option for 2 full days, and I understand the appeal of it. And I'm not judging anyone who would have made that choice. But my son has 2 children, my grandchildren, and they did nothing wrong. They're 9 and 11 years old. They didn't ask their parents to exclude me from Thanksgiving. They didn't ask to be used as emotional leverage in a financial arrangement they knew nothing about. So here's what I did. I established a trust for each grandchild directly. College funds, fully funded, structured so that neither parent can touch them under any circumstances. Franklin helped me make that ironclad. I don't use that word lightly, but he does good work. I reduced my son's share of the estate significantly. What remains for him is tied to conditions Franklin and I discussed carefully. I'm not going to detail all of it here, but the short version is that inheritance and accountability now live in the same document, and I designated a meaningful portion to 2 charities Margaret believed in. It felt right to have her name attached to something good coming out of all this. I drove home from Franklin's office and sat in my driveway for a while. The oak tree was bare against the grey December sky. I felt clear. That's the only way I can put it, not happy. Clear. My son called the following Saturday. He said he'd heard I was in Sedona for Thanksgiving. I said I was. He paused. Then, with who? An old friend, I said. Someone I'd known for 37 years. Another pause. Dad, is everything okay? I feel like. I don't know. I feel like maybe we've been dropping the ball. I had a choice in that moment. I could have let it go, accepted the vague half apology and moved on. There was a version of me, the version that just wanted his son back, that was still grieving Margaret, that still remembered teaching this boy to throw a baseball in this same backyard, that wanted very much to say it's fine, son, we're fine. But it wasn't fine, and pretending otherwise wouldn't make it so. Can you come over? I asked. I'd like to talk, just us. He came the following Thursday evening. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. I opened the laptop. I turned it to face him. I want you to look at something, I said. He leaned forward. I watched his face as he read the dates, the amounts, the notes in the column beside each entry. His jaw tightened. He looked up once, then back down. He scrolled to the bottom. Dad, $63,400, I said. Over 2 years and 8 months. Not one payment back, not one acknowledgement after the first couple of times. I kept waiting for you to bring it up. You never did. I was going to. I know you were going to, I said. You've been going to for a while. Silence. I'm not going to yell at you, I told him. And I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. Both of those would be dishonest, and I think we've had enough dishonesty between us. He looked at his hands. He's 41 years old, and he looked, in that moment, about 14. The Thanksgiving call, he said finally. That was her idea. I want you to know that. I looked at him carefully, and you went along with it. He didn't answer. That was its own kind of answer. I'm not asking you to explain your marriage to me, I said. That's not my business. But I am your father. And on Father's Day you forgot to call. On my birthday you sent a text at 9 in the evening that I'm pretty sure your wife typed, and on Thanksgiving you let her call me and tell me I wasn't close enough family to be included. He put his face in his hands. I miss your mother, he said. His voice cracked. It was the realest thing he'd said since he walked in. I know, I said. So do I. We sat there for a while. Here's the thing about adult children and their parents that nobody really talks about. The breakdown doesn't usually happen all at once. It's not a door slamming. It's a series of doors, each one closing a little softer than the last, until one day you realize you can't hear anything on the other side anymore. Stopping that, really stopping it, not just patching it, takes something harder than anger. Anger is easy. Anger gives you something to do. What I had to do was harder. I had to say, clearly and without drama, this is what happened. This is how it made me feel, and I need things to be different. And then I had to mean it, not as a threat, as a fact. My son and I talked for nearly 3 hours that Thursday night. We talked about money, and we talked about his mother, and we talked about his marriage, which is more strained than I knew. We talked about what kind of father he wanted to be, and what kind of son he'd been. At one point he cried. At one point I did too. Before he left, I told him about the will. Not all of it, but enough. The kids are taken care of, I said. Whatever else happens, your children will have their college educations, that's done. He nodded. His eyes were red. And me? That depends, I said, on what the next few years look like. He didn't argue with that. I think somewhere under everything, he knew it was fair. It's been about 7 months since that conversation. My son and I talk on the phone once a week now. Real conversations, not the kind where someone's waiting for a pause long enough to mention a financial problem. He's started seeing a therapist, which I'm glad about. His marriage is going through what I'll call a difficult renegotiation. I stay out of it. My daughter-in-law and I are polite to each other. That's the honest word for it. Polite. Maybe it becomes something warmer. Maybe it doesn't. I stopped trying to predict outcomes I can't control. My grandchildren came over for a weekend in the spring. We made pancakes and watched an old western and walked down to the creek behind the neighborhood. My granddaughter found a turtle and held it with extraordinary tenderness, while her brother tried to name it something undignified. It was a good weekend. I went back to Sedona in February. Clem and June and I spent 4 days doing very little. Pickle has claimed me as his secondary human, which I find genuinely moving. June has started teaching me to cook things I've been afraid of my whole life. On our last evening there, we sat on the back terrace as the sun went down and turned the rocks that deep impossible red. And I thought about Margaret, and I thought about time, and I didn't feel alone. That's not a small thing. At 67 years old, after everything, not feeling alone is not a small thing at all. I'm still in my house, still have the oak tree, still do my coffee in the morning at the same counter where I stood when my daughter-in-law called with her close family speech. The chair where Margaret used to sit is still there. Some mornings I think about moving it. Most mornings I leave it where it is. I don't have a tidy lesson to wrap this up with, because life doesn't work that way, and I've been around long enough to stop pretending it does. What I can tell you is this: the hardest conversation I've ever had wasn't with my son. It was the one I had with myself, standing at that sink, when I finally stopped pretending that loving someone meant accepting whatever they gave you. Love is not a blank check. I learned that late, but I learned it.